All right, guys, welcome back to Nutrition is King and Fad Diets Are Lame. Obviously, this entire YouTube series, we're breaking down the different pillars of nutrition and how to make any diet work for you. So today we're going to the second pillar, which is the macronutrients or macronutrient breakdown. So let's get into it. So macronutrients are comprised of the three main nutrients that make up the bulk of your calories. And they make up 30% of your physique transformation. So whatever results you're looking for, you want to mostly focus on calories and macros, not one or the other. So these macronutrients are your proteins, your fats, and your carbs. And there's also calories that come from alcohol and sugar alcohols. Calories are very similarly digested in the body like fat. They're the closest comparison to those type of calories is fat calories, whereas alcohol, for every gram of alcohol that you have, it is 7 calories. For every gram of fat you have, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but for every gram of fat that you have, it is 9 calories. So they're both very dense, and that's why you don't want to have too much of them. So goals. The reason why getting your macronutrients in the accurate ratio for you is because we all have preferences in eating, habits, taste, flavor, right? And we all have different lifestyles and different physique goals, fitness goals. And that being said, it requires different ratios for your different levels of activity, intensity, all of that jazz. Depending on how you want to look, how you want to perform, your ratios will change. So energy. Additionally, we cannot separate calories from macros because each macronutrient carries a specific amount of energy, calories, and each macronutrient has its own particular duties to perform so that our bodies can function properly. Protein has 4 calories per gram, carbohydrates has 4 calories per gram, and like I said before, fats have 9 calories per gram. So how do we start designing our own diets based off the knowledge we have between calories and macronutrients? Well, first we have to decide our calorie allotment / constraints by committing to a deficit in calories, fat loss, maintenance in calories, maintaining physique, and or just new muscle composition that you've built. Maybe you went on a surplus and now you're trying to maintain that muscle mass. You want to go into slight maintenance in calories just so that you can maintain that muscle mass while also getting rid of the body fat that you've accrued. Or like I just said, a surplus in calories, which is a hypertrophy muscle gain phase. Once you decide on your goal calories wise and physique wise, you are now free to manipulate your macros depending on your lifestyle preferences and goals. So before we dive into figuring out exactly how we should construct your macros for your diet, let's briefly define each macronutrient and some of their roles in the body. So let's start off with protein, as it is the most important macronutrient that we consume. Proteins are large molecules comprised of smaller molecules called amino acids. Proteins make up many of the tissues in the human body and comprise enzymes that have governed reactions and underlie a good portion of bodily functions at some level. Human proteins are comprised of 20 amino acids, of which our bodies can produce 11 endogenously, which means naturally it occurs in your body. The other 9 amino acids need to be ingested via food sources. That's why some people will buy BCAAs. But again, one thing I always say on BCAAs, my own clients, I don't suggest that you have BCAAs unless you just want the flavor and you're in a very deep cut, you're in a very deep deficit. Wouldn't recommend it. You can get all your amino acids via just your protein sources. So as long as you're getting your adequate amount of protein in, you don't need BCAAs to reach your goals. It's just an added layer. I'm getting ahead of myself again, but that's the last pillar of nutrition is hydration and supplementation. BCAAs will maybe give you a single % of improvement. And you can actually, there's some studies that say if you abuse it, it could actually slow down progress. So here's a few roles of protein in your body. Here's a few roles. Enzyme and protein synthesis, so that means that recovery, and whenever you hurt yourself, your body starts protein synthesis to then start the recovery process. Transportation of nutrients to the right places, so actually proteins are used to shuttle nutrients sometimes. A source of energy when carbs and fats are low, so this isn't prime, this isn't ideal, but when you are in a deep enough deficit and you have low fats and low carbs, your body will start breaking down protein, and that's not ideal. So that's why it's important to have the ratios in the right place when you're in a deficit in calories. Fluid balance, some of you may not know that. Protein actually helps with hydration and hormone production, obviously testosterone and all that jazz. So that is all the roles. Let's get into fats now. Fats are super important for health. It provides energy in case when we are sedentary or activity is very low. Most fats in healthy diets are consumed by cooking oils, which there's some cooking oils that I would obviously steer away from. Nuts, dairy, and meats, but these are generally where you want to get all your fats from. There are polyunsaturated fatty acids, which are found in mostly vegetable and cereal oil. Most of the time, you want to probably stay away from these types, but they can be good. This normally has a tendency to lower blood cholesterol levels. Monounsaturated fatty acids, which are found in olive oil and canola oil, and it helps also lower blood cholesterol levels while maintaining high density lipoprotein, good cholesterol essentially. HDLs, I'm sure a lot of you guys know about this already. Saturated fatty acids, which are found in meat and dairy products, usually increases serum cholesterol. So saturated fatty acids, which normally gets a really bad rap, is actually extremely important for testosterone production, because if you we break down cholesterol to create testosterone. So you need fatty acids. You need saturated fatty acids. Don't listen to some of the health nuts out there that are telling you not to eat meat. Some functions of fats in the body. Fat is a source of energy. Like I said before in the very beginning, it's normally used when you're sleeping, when you're resting, in between meals. Whenever you're basically low activity, that's when fat is being used. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. That's why you do less cardio after your training days, because if you've trained appropriately, if you've trained hard enough, you should be in somewhat of a fasted state after your workouts. So if your goal is to the priority is to uphold muscle gaining and recovery, then you want to lift for it first, and then if you want to shred afterwards, if you want to lose some body fat, it's better to do cardio afterwards. And oftentimes, if you're in a deep enough deficit, you want to just do low, steady state cardio. You don't want to do high intensity. I'd recommend that if you're in the very beginning of your cut, then you could ramp up the intensity a little bit more, do more HIIT training, do more, running, things that are considered actual cardio activity rather than walking. I include walking as part of cardio activity, but it's not the greatest for measuring one's ability or training the heart. Fat also provides insulation from extreme cold temperatures. So, back in the day when we didn't have AC, we didn't have heat, we didn't have these controlled conditions, and we were living out in the farms, and we didn't have the greatest insulation as far as housing goes. Some people would purposely eat more just so that they can, stay warm and, put up back on fat. Fat is an insulator. It protects our organs. So we have visceral fat that protects our organs. Highly satiating, helps you stay fuller for longer, which makes it a good snack option. So I typically use fats to help me get to my next meal. So I use fats and proteins to help me get to my next meal, or slow digesting carbs to get me to my next meal. And basically the goal is to satiate yourself as much as possible so that you can get to your next meal, because you really don't want to be super hungry during a diet. If you're, unbearably hungry from the get-go of a diet, then you're probably dieting wrong, in my opinion. Helps carry essential nutrients, fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, K, a deck. I like to call it a deck. Anyways, let's get into the next. Carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are our body's main source of energy. So I have to say this verbatim. In a world where carbs are constantly getting a bad rap, I hope this video sheds some light on how carbs are not just your enemy. You just need to learn how to use them as a tool for your lifestyle and goals. So carbohydrates are large molecules that come in 3 different forms that each absorb into the body at varying rates. So this is where we're getting to a little bit of meal timing. This isn't the video, the YouTube, the pillar of health that we're going to be getting into about meal timing, but meal timing does come into a huge play, especially when it comes to carbohydrates. So let's get into it. We have monosaccharides, we have disaccharides, and we have polysaccharides. Monosaccharides, as the word mono says, single molecule carbohydrates, include glucose, fructose, and galactose. Simple carbs, honey dried fruits like apples and dates, and fresh fruits like grapes and bananas. The closest thing that we can get to just basically glucose, essentially, right? Disaccharides, 2 molecule combinations of monosaccharides used to form a single large molecule. These include sucrose, a glucose and fructose bonded, lactose, a glucose and galactose bonded, and maltose, 2 glucoses bonded. Also simple carbs, cereal, breads, beer, sweet potatoes. I know beer might be surprising, but beer is made out of barley, which is a carb. Sweet potatoes, ice cream. Yes, you might say, oh, well, that's more fatty. Well, it's also got a lot of carbs in it too. And chocolate. And the last thing, polysaccharides. Longer strings of monosaccharides chained together. These include starch, a digestible form of many glucoses linked together, cellulose or a fiber, which is mostly indigestible by humans and made up of glucose molecules, and glycogen, an irregular matrix of connected glucose molecules, which is the most common form for carbohydrates stored in muscle tissue and the liver. Complex carbs can be breads, potatoes, rice, pasta, cereal bars, and grains. And obviously, some of these can be interchangeable. Some potatoes are very fast acting. Some rice is very fast acting. Some grains are very fast acting. But for the most part, they are polysaccharides. All these forms of carbohydrates can be converted to glucose for energy in the body. So, if there's nothing you learn about this in this video other than this, then let it be this: carbohydrates are essential for your diet. Now, if you're a sedentary person, I would recommend that you have more fats, and especially if you don't have a training program and you are a person that's sitting at the desk constantly, I would recommend that you lower your fat, lower your carbohydrates to the minimum, to about 100 grams to 150 grams, and keep most of your calories into fats and protein, because just the likelihood of you turning those carbohydrates into fat stores is very high if you're not a very active person. Carbohydrates, again, is used for energy, and if you're not a very active person, might as well just use the minimum so that you can function, right? And then have maybe a little bit above the minimum just so that you can feel a little bit better if you're not trying to be, optimizing your body fat and all that. And you just want to look like the average Joe, which is, that's fine. I don't care to look like the average Joe, but, I'm sure a lot of you that are watching this probably don't want to look like the average Joe. These are the four main priorities in this order. Carbohydrates are converted to glucose for immediate energy, transport to the blood to circulate and give glucose to needy cells, such as neuronal cells that do not store much energy of their own and prefer glucose. Essentially, carbs are needed for your nervous system to function properly. So if you don't have enough carbs in your diet, you could actually just be uncoordinated. You can be dizzy. You may not have very good sensory or motor skills at that point. Number 3, transport to the liver to be formed as glycogen for storage. Liver glycogen can be broken down to release glucose into the blood when blood glucose levels fall too low. So maybe you've gone too long without eating. This is what happens. If you're in a semi-fasted state, your body will go into glycogen stores to then help you break down and have energy. And then the last thing, transport to skeletal muscles to be assembled as glycogen for storage. When skeletal muscles are working at higher intensities of effort, anything as hard as a jog or harder, they lean more heavily on the stored glycogen to provide the energy to power contractions. So that's why we carb load sometimes before we run, right? That's why you don't want to just be eating carbs 30 minutes before you go for a run, which is not a bad thing, but you want to be more planned and prepared than that. You want to have at least 2 to 3 hours of food prior to that in your body. And then even better so just the night before, and then, especially depending on how much you're going for a run, right? So here's a noteworthy mention for you guys. I'm not going to read all this because it's a lot, and I don't want to just waste your time by having me read everything over. But essentially what this is saying that carbs has had a bad rap, and for years has had a bad rap, and now finally people are trying to tell the truth about carbs. Simple carbs were seen as bad, monosaccharides and disaccharides being, and then complex carbs are the only thing that you were supposed to be eating. And this is a fundamentally flawed way of thinking, because there are some types of carbs that are considered simple carbohydrates that are actually incredibly slow digesting. So don't get it mixed up. Just because you're having a complex carb doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be very slow to digesting, and just because you're having a simple carb doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be very fast digesting. There are some fruits that are very slow digesting. For example, there are some apples that are very slow digesting. So just food for thought. And it says here, like potatoes, for example, can be very high absorbing, very fast absorbing. So it's good to know the different kinds and how it affects the body. So that being said, again, pause here if you want, but we're going to move forward. So let's get to the part where you probably all want to know more about how to properly arrange your macros. First, calculate your calories using the calorie calculator formula I told you about in the previous video about calories. If you haven't watched that video yet, I'd go back and watch the calorie video, the first pillar of nutrition. Next thing you need to know is the calorie constraint hypothesis of CCH. So we've already kind of talked about this in passing. Essentially what the CCH means is that calories and macros cannot be they're not independent of each other. They're interdependent on one another. So they rely on one another. Macros has calories. Calories you need to set to then define macros. They can't do without the other. So again, let's just go into this. This means that we cannot consume macronutrients without their inherent calorie content. All the three macros must be manipulated together and affect one another, meaning if you increase protein on one end, calories must be lowered in either fats or carbs or both. If you increase carb intake, you must lower fats or protein or both. It always has to be constrained to the calories that you've set. So that's the most important thing in a diet is first setting your calories, figuring out what your goal is, and then figuring out your macronutrient breakdown per preference. So as I said, the preference will be then dictated by your goal, how you want to look, and how you're trying to perform, how you want to perform. So there's different ways to arrange your macros depending on your sport or what your goal is. However, figuring out the specific way you want to lay out your macros is the same process each time. First, you want to quantify how much protein you're going to consume. Then you're going to choose your carbohydrate quantity based off of how active you are. And the rest of your calories are then going to be fulfilled by fat calories. Again, depending on your training routine and what your goals are, macros change. So I'll only go over the most common examples. So for those of you that are watching, some of you might be untrained individuals wanting to lose fat. Some of you might be new to the gym, or maybe you've never experienced a real solid training program. I would consider you an untrained individual, and to define more specifically an untrained individual, this is someone who's not experienced in serious training, or someone who's new to training 1 to 3 years and wants to lose body fat. Now, you can even be an untrained individual if you've been training for 20 years, but you've been training piss poor. And for lack of better words, I've known people that have been training for 15 years, but they've never really seen a really hard day of training in their life, or effective training day in their life. So they're still considered a newbie lifter. For example, one of my greatest clients, my first client, Keith, he trained for like 12 years, biking, lifting weights, running, all of it, right? And but he got almost no results, almost none. And he lost a lot of weight. He was pretty overweight at one point, and then through the biking and lifting and trying just to be aware of his food, just being aware of calories, which is just one pillar of nutrition, he was able to lose all the body fat. But he was trying to optimize, and he was trying to put on size, and he wasn't, because he didn't have an effective training program. He was an untrained individual despite having years of training under his belt. So for untrained individuals, you don't need to have per se the gram per pound of body weight that a lot of people say. You can actually start out with lower. I wouldn't recommend the minimum. The minimum amount of protein for general health, as it says here, is 0.3 grams. It says per pound of body weight, and can go up to 1.5 grams per pound of body weight during a cut. There's very minimal benefit going past 1.5 in a very deep cut. You can do 2 if you're like really deep and you're like trying to cut out most of your fats and carbs, and you're trying to funnel most of your calories to protein for the sake of maintaining muscle mass and also trying to just feel alive and satiated. But I wouldn't recommend it because of the amount of once past 1.5, you don't save more muscle by eating more past that, and that's a problem with a lot of meatheads. Have a hard time dealing with. They think that they have 300 grams or 400 grams of protein that is going to help them. But anyways, moving on. From there, you simply dictate how many carbs you want that is sustainable for you. It can be anywhere between 0.3, which is the minimum. You don't want to go below that because of you won't be able to function. In 0.3, you won't be able to function very well. And at the very beginning of your diet, you can have like 1.5 grams. And then from there, you just want to leave the room for fat calories. And again, just be careful when you're calculating. The minimum for fat calories is always going to be 0.3 grams per pound of body weight. Now for trained individuals, so a lot of you will probably be fitting that category of trained individual where you've been training for years and you've gotten some decent results, but you want better. This is where you need to always start. And some of you might already know this. And this is for a trained individual who wants to lose weight, by the way, and maintain muscle mass. You want to start off with at least 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, and can scale up to 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight. Although studies have shown that above 1.5 is minimal benefit. So I've already told you about that. I got ahead of myself. After choosing protein allotment, you simply divvy up the rest of the calories to carbs depending on how active you are, and again to fat. So it's the same process every single time. So that's it, guys. I really hope you learned something from this. Again, the one thing I'll leave you with is it really depends your macronutrient breakdown for you specifically, which will depend on your training modality. So what you prefer to train for, what you train like. If you're a runner, your carbohydrates are going to be far above that of a bodybuilder. A bodybuilder might have maybe 2 grams per pound of body weight maximum during like a bulk, or I wouldn't really even say maintenance during a bulk. And they'll scarcely go above 2 or maybe 2.5 times their body weight. And then their fats are decently low if they are going above that 2 grams per pound of body weight. Carbohydrates for runners is essential, so they can go up to 3, 4, 5 times their body weight. And that's typically for like, marathon runners. If you're a power lifter, lots of rest time, you're explosive movements, so you're going to have a lot more beef in your diet because you want to have that natural creatine found in beef. But at the same time, like, you're not that active because you're doing maybe tops 12 to 10 to 16 sets during your workout, and you're also resting anywhere between 2 to 5 minutes between sets. That's why there's always the joke that powerlifters are, they're sitting down for far too long during their resting times, and they're eating a sandwich or they're eating Skittles or something. So for them, they actually don't want to have as much carbs. They want to have like a pretty balanced diet of between fats, carbs, and protein. My own coach, Jeremy Hornstroh, oftentimes will tell people you should have like a 35-35-30 split, where you have 35% fats, 35% protein, and 30% carbs, or maybe you can switch those around depending on if you're a little bit more active during a certain lifting phase. Then you might want to switch the protein for 30% and the carbs for 35%. So again, depending on your training modality, guys, things will change pretty drastically, and it depends on how you want to look. If you're a power lifter, for example, that wants to maintain his lifts, but you also want to lean up a little bit, you might just have a little more fats than usual, lower your carbs a good amount to almost ketosis levels, to the point where you're almost doing a keto diet, and then have lots of protein. So it changes depending on your training modalities. So that's it, guys. Thank you for tuning in. The next thing is going to be meal timing. We're going to be focusing a lot on meal timing. We got a little bit into it with the carbohydrates, but meal timing is dictated more than just carbs. It's also dependent on the protein that you eat, the fats that you eat, how much you eat. So we're going to get into that, how often you eat. So that being said, stay tuned for that next one if you want to hear more about that and how to optimize it. Meal timing makes up 10% of your goals of your physique transformation. And even that's not a big number. If you can lock that in with macros and with calories, you're getting 90% of the results. And that's what we care about, right? So anyways, God bless you. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.